This is Glass Houses, a Billy Joel podcast.
Hey, this is Liberty DeVito.
This is John Jackson, director of the Billy Joel Archive.
This is Russell Javers.
This is Mike Del Giudice.
This is Richie Canada, and you're listening to Glass Houses, a Billy Joel podcast. It's awesome.
So it's often old is new again in the Billy world when it comes to reissues, re-releases, things like that. But the latest release is a little different. Billy Joel, the 100th, live at Madison Square Garden, the complete concert, was released on Blu-ray and DVD just last week, May 29th, 2026. Now, this is the first time we're getting an officially released full concert. But interestingly, it's not the first time, of course, that a lot of this footage has been released to the public. This is essentially an expanded version of the CBS special of the Madison Square Garden 100th concert that aired last year, just a few weeks after the concert occurred. That was well celebrated. It won some awards. It raised many a fan's ire because so many channels apparently switched off in the middle of Piano Man and went to the local news, which turned out to be a blessing in disguise because then the network gave it an encore presentation, which drew in even more people, so the ratings looked even better. It was assumed at some point we would see the full release, and now we have it, which is exciting, again, not only because it's a full release, but if you go back and you listen to our episode with Steve Cohen, where he gets into the nuts and bolts of how he put it together, it's fascinating what they put into it. And when you look at this through that lens, you really see just how much care was put into this package, at least in terms of just the aesthetics. Obviously, the music part is in Billy's realm, but just the way it looked, the immersive feel, the cinematic experience, everything behind it really comes to fruition and is really, really apparent when you get to sit down and watch the full concert, especially on Blu-ray.
Yeah, it's really a celebration and a culmination of that great residency run. You and I were fortunate to catch the final show in July of 2024, and I was fortunate to catch a few over the years as well. I think we were all discussing over the years that they've got to document this in one way, shape, or form, because this is such an unprecedented thing that they're all doing. When the CBS special came to be, it proved to be the perfect opportunity. And with the technology being as such, it afforded the team the opportunity to film the entire concert, which we talked about with Steve last time as well, where when things are done on film and things of that nature, you have more budget constraints where you have to change reels and you don't have unlimited space. Here, you're able to get multiple cameras capturing all the moments, the room as a whole, and tight on stage. It really feels like the most immersive Billy Joel performance we've ever seen filmed.
Remember also, when you do find full concerts on YouTube, they're great, but those are usually maybe one static camera that was captured for posterity, or it's the feed that was going to the Jumbotron. So it's great, but it was made either just to document the event and or it was complimentary to the concert as it happened. And this was made with the home audience in mind. Unless you think this is just going to be us pontificating about it, we are going to hear from the sources once again. This time we have executive producers Steve Cohen and Barry Ehrmann, the team behind bringing this to fruition, both on CBS and for the home release. And we're going to hear more about how it was put together, what it was like expanding from the limited number of songs that were on the network special versus now. And of course, we get into some fun stuff for us. We twisted their arm and got them to start talking about camera lenses and things like that. So if you're that person, pop some popcorn. We got all that coming for you. But before that, let's take a look real quick at the specs for this. The date of the concert was March 28th, 2024. It's the 100th concert in the Madison Square Garden monthly residency that started in 2014. And that gets confusing because just a few months later, we were there for Billy's final show at Madison Square Garden, which was the 150th overall. So no, between March and June or so, he did not go there 4 times a week to go from 100 to 50. This commemorates 100 residency shows versus the 150 shows overall he's played at MSG.
So if you rewind just before the residency started, that's far less than 50 shows that he had from 1978 all the way to 2014. You're talking at 110, 103, 105 shows of the residency since then. So it's pretty wild.
Yeah, it almost doesn't sound like a lot, but when you figure, he's been doing it for less than 50 years. You don't tour every year. Now, granted, he would do 2 or 3 nights at Madison Square Garden, but once you figure, if he tours for 2 years in a row, like a span or 16 months, he's just going to do his one run at MSG. It's not like he was there in, let's just say 86 and 87 all the time. You have all the off years, and then, of course, you have those early 2000s where he wasn't touring that much.
And then you also had an entire album cycle where he did not play the Garden at all. He played Nassau and he played, parts surrounding it, but for the Stormfront tour, he didn't come to MSG at all.
On the Blu-ray and or DVD, you get Miami 2017, My Life, Vienna, The Downeaster Alexa, An Innocent Man, The Longest Time, Turn the Lights Back On, Big Man on Mulberry Street featuring Sting, and then the Police song, Every Little Thing She Does Is Magic, also featuring Sting. Moving Out, Our Deep Cut Dark Horse, Half a Mile Away, The Entertainer, Don't Ask Me Why, Allentown, New York State of Mind, Only the Good Die Young, River of Dreams with River Deep Mountain High, sung by Crystal Taliaferro, Nessun Dorma, sung by Mike Del Giudice, Scenes from an Italian Restaurant, Piano Man, We Didn't Start the Fire, Uptown Girl, It's Still Rock and Roll to Me, Big Shot, and You May Be Right with Rock and Roll. Does Mike sing rock and roll? Mike sings rock and roll, right?
Mike sings rock and roll.
Mike sings rock and roll.
And we actually have a fun little story about the inclusion of rock and roll during our conversation with Stephen Barry as well.
Yeah. That's like a great rock and roll story, but also not a rock and roll story because it involves paperwork. But
right, exactly.
you'll see what we mean.
It's a dad rock and roll story.
Exactly. Yeah. So that leaves the new songs that weren't on the CBS special are Downeaster Alexa, Longest Time, Every Little Thing She Does Is Magic, Half a Mile Away, The Entertainer, Don't Ask Me Why, Allentown, Nessun Dorma, We Didn't Start the Fire, Uptown Girl, and Big Shot.
So this is a fun one. This is makes a great viewing companion when you guys get a chance to check this out. Again, on DVD or Blu-ray out now. And you could also watch it digitally. But for now, we're going to get into this great behind-the-scenes conversation with Steve Cohen and Barry Ehrmann.
I was going back over our conversation from last year, and we got so many great glimpses behind the curtains of how this was put together from the technical standpoint and a lot from the thematic standpoint. And so picking up with the Blu-ray now, the big question is, how did this come to become a release of the full concert? I'm sure this was an option on the table from the beginning, but at what point was the green light given to set the stage for the full release?
Barry Ehrmann, and I, Barry was the executive producer. We were partners on all of this. And, I think I spoke about this in the first podcast, that it was really important for me to make sure that we internally had the maximum amount of control to be able to capture this event. Being production manager and the producer, it was really important for me to make sure that I had a partner in broadcast that, number one, was aligned with, the vision I had for capturing this, and number two, had the ability to integrate seamlessly with a huge rock and roll touring organization. And he knew all of the players. And one of the great things about, just to blow some smoke about Barry is that, he's a creative producer. He's a nuts and bolts guy, incredibly financially responsible, builds great budgets, gets the best people in the business to do it. But, we from the very beginning looked at this as we needed to capture every possible second in that venue, regardless of what the first product or what the product was going to be, what the licensed product for broadcast was going to be. Our plan was that, we really didn't know an idea of what was going to encompass the broadcast, the material in the broadcast. And we knew with commercials and all of that stuff, we had to, conform to what would work on a network broadcast. But in my mind and in Barry's mind, eventually the entire show would want to be seen. So, we captured it in the way that we captured the whole show. so this Blu-ray and this release of the entire show was always in the plan.
When we did the CBS broadcast, from the date of record to when we had to deliver to CBS was 8 days. So Steve and I had to scramble to figure out what songs were going to be in the broadcast. And we really had to just focus on those songs. But all along, we were telling our partners, hey, we should be doing this full show. We need to edit and mix every single song. This needs to be a historic document of this concert. And it was a bit of a fight, and I think we ended up going back a couple of months later, 3-4 months later, and I think the CBS broadcast was 14 songs, and we went back and edited the other 11 songs, put it into concert order, which it wasn't on the CBS broadcast, and had a full length ready to go, which is culminating in the DVD and Blu-ray release.
And the other part about that is, when you talk about the fight, people just want to pony up with the bare minimum of expense to try and maximize their profit, right? And no matter what happens, there's this mindset of we'll capture it in one day down the line, you guys can edit and mix it. And Barry was very, very persistent about guys, we have a team in place. These are we have the director online, we have his availability, we have the facility. You may want to put it off, but it's going to cost you twice as much to retool all of this stuff, retransfer all of this stuff, relog all of this stuff, and then put a team together. And the chances of getting that same team together 6 months, a year and a half down the line, becomes less possible as you get further away from the project. So Barry was persistent, and there was a great deal of arm twisting. In this world, the record label turns around to the artist and say, well, if you want to put it out, you pony up. And Bill's relationship with Sony is well, I'll do what I need to do, but we're partners in all of this. So there was a bit of arm twisting. They have limited budgets, or they have specific budgets that they can spend on. But we knew, material wise, that this concert was going to be historic and was never, ever going to happen again. And, now we're a few years away from this, and it could very well be the last performance, the last television performance that you ever see of Billy. We don't know if he's going to work again. It's becoming more and more precious and much more historic. And the other part about it that's exciting is it was shot at the highest quality. And now that people actually still do have Blu-ray players, if you put a Blu-ray on, I have Yankee Stadium, for example, and I have Shea Stadium on Blu-ray. And comparing those, the way those look to what this looks like now, is no comparison. It is so amazing. You put that on a Blu-ray with surround sound on a big screen, and you are literally in that room. And that was the whole takeaway of how we wanted to do it creatively. So it worked on a flat screen on broadcast. That's what everybody came back and said, wow, I'm in the room. Now you're really in the room.
One thing that I do have to say is that Sony were wonderful partners. They let us do what we wanted to do. They never hassled me. I had to put in a budget. I had to put in a creative plan. And they never said anything. They never questioned what I was doing. They showed up at the show. They weren't on top of me. They were happy to be inside the arena watching the show, not looking over my shoulder. They really were wonderful partners creatively. They allowed us to use really the finest equipment. We basically had a blank check to do what we needed to do. So I do have to speak well of Sony. They were wonderful partners.
Yeah, don't get me wrong. I wasn't throwing shade either, but I just, sometimes people are interested in how the sausage is made. It's a big job, but they also had a great deal of confidence. Barry has an incredible resume. They trust me. So, it wasn't as bad of an uphill battle as you might think.
Well, when you're thinking about budget as well as a creative, when you're shooting for television and also for a Blu-ray later down the line, does that have an effect on hardware choices, creative choices, things like what cameras, how many, what sort of angles, what sort of aspect ratios, light saturation, things like that?
The interesting thing about Billy is, we filmed the show with 22 cameras. And, it's a lot of cameras to fill, there's a great band. It's a large band on stage, but it's essentially the star is Billy, who sits at the piano most of the
Right.
night. The trick on Billy is that he's on a rotating piano platform, and he's a wise ass. He controls the pedals with his feet, whether he goes left or right. And if you tell him, okay, don't move during this song, he'll move 8 times, it was a mathematics to filming him and surrounding him and getting him from every angle. But yes, we
Sure.
want to use the most cinematic cameras, possible.
Mhm.
It's many choices in the camera world, but we knew eventually we wanted this cinematic look. We wanted the beauty of Madison Square Garden. Steve
Mhm.
did an incredible job on the lights. It's so cinema, that show. He
Mhm.
also brought in the lighted wristbands. So, on the reverse shots, you really just had that beauty. But, technically you want to use the best things that are available and for that will match the lighting. We did a
Mhm.
lot of work in advance, just testing to make sure that
And that's one thing that we've noticed too, especially the last few years is with the camera technology, it really allows you to capture so much more information and the richness of the actual live production. Whereas if you go years and years back, it was just more about having the room bright so you could see everything. And that's no longer the case.
Well, as we said, I probably in the last time we talked,
Yeah.
there were 3 characters in this play. There was, Billy, there was the audience, and there was Madison Square Garden. And each one of them had an equal part in creating this, emotional environment. So, what we tried to do was, make it sort of seamless and make all of these players shine so that when you were looking at Billy performing, you were aware of the audience, you were aware of the architecture behind him, which then conveyed that feeling of being in the rooms. And Barry, what production really did was saw the vision and then gave us the best tools to capture that. It wasn't just run and gun, set some cameras up and roll some tape, obviously.
Right.
And we have to mention the director, Paul Dugdale, who's one of the most brilliant cinematic directors on the planet, I believe. And he flew into his show and scouted the show with us. He just had a vision immediately of what that show should look like and camera angles. And our director of photography, Brett Turnbull, really worked with Steve hand in hand. They just created such beauty. And Paul's vision on camera placement, along with Steve and myself, it was just perfect. It was just, an exciting show to watch for a guy that sits at a piano the whole night. It
Right.
was just exciting.
And I'll tell you guys, like, you watch this show, it's the one time a television show is actually better than the live experience. I mean, it was better
Mhm.
than being there live. There was more detail and more things that you could, feel and all of that stuff. And then you lay on top of that the ultimate, the most resolution you can get in today's, day without sitting in an edit suite. It's quite an experience. And like the fans now get the entire show. We put in all of that stuff that Billy, the interstitial commentary and his jokes and his personality and all of that stuff that you have to cut, for time in a, on a broadcast. This is a gift to the fans more than anything else of, this incredible historic thing. Dennis Arfa always talks about the fact that, Madison Square Garden was millions of people in New York, but there were hundreds of millions of people in the country that never got to do it. And if we
Right.
hadn't recorded it and filmed it and put it out, they would have never known it existed. So, we historically recorded this thing, for posterity because it was kind of a big deal.
In the case of the TV special, songs were cut, they were resequenced. When you were thinking about releasing this as a full concert, were there anything done behind the scenes to make the show translate to video without actually changing the nature of the performances?
We had theatrical in mind. You know, we did it in that quality as if it would be released in a movie theater, and that
Mhm.
translates to DVD. You're actually boiling it down a bit. You know, you're reducing the quality for Blu-ray. It looks phenomenal. We didn't cut any corners. We produced it in the highest, 4K resolution there was. We didn't even do, many people cheat by doing it in what's called UHD, which is kind of a, reduced 4K. And we did it in
Mm.
full 4K. We cut no corners. Uh, we just wanted the best quality. And Sony did a phenomenal job mastering it for Blu-ray. It looks beautiful. I mean, it looks better than most, which is odd for a show that runs so long, that it's close to 2.5 hours. You usually have to cut down bandwidth for it to fit on a Blu-ray, and
Oh,
they were
sure.
able to make it work, and it's gorgeous.
We knew we only had one bite of the apple. So, like Barry said, we knew that there were a few songs that had to make it in. We had an option of a couple of songs that would be the ones if they were really good performances or if they were captured really well, that they would end up being in the performance. We wanted to get an equal balance of hits and personality and deep cuts. All of those things went into the planning of what we were focusing on. But I don't think that there was ever a time where, you know, Dugdale was sitting there saying, "Oh, we're not going to use this one, so just kind of go to the bathroom." Like every single song was captured as if it was going to end up being in the final, in the broadcast, and then all the way through it. We had a couple of tussles. We were going to put "We Didn't Start the Fire" in there, but we got such a phenomenal performance of "Still Rock and Roll" to me that we were like, well, that's better than "We Didn't Start the Fire." So it made the broadcast. There were no corners that were cut in any of that stuff. It was basically figure we're gonna see this entire thing at any given point, which, as Barry says, people cut corners, you know.
Yeah.
Union breaks. Hey, put your cameras down, go take a pee. You need 15 minutes. Like, we didn't do any of that stuff.
There's also going to be a PBS broadcast that I
Okay.
think starts airing on May 29th. It's not the full length. It's another shortened version, but it's slightly different songs than what was on the CBS broadcast. I don't remember offhand, but it's
Sure.
different than CBS. So people could also get a taste of that. And they could also buy, the Blu-rays through PBS, which really helps out public broadcasting, who are such fans of music and cultural arts, and they need all the support that you could give them.
Hmm.
PBS has paid for the rights to rebroadcast the sessions of video of Billy from 1972, which was his very first television performance. And if you remember from the doc, it's him with a leather jacket and dirty hair and the original band. So they're going to bookend this fund drive with arguably the last concert of Billy Joel and the very first television, which was also a PBS broadcast. So, it fits into this whole legacy,
Sure.
legacy piece of how we're exploring Billy's place in the firmament. The other thing about that Barry said about the different running order on the PBS special is that was another thing we had to think about. Well, you got to put the hits in, but you don't want to do the CBS special. So you got to put some of the songs that no one's ever seen as a preview of what they can get on the DVD. So we thought long and hard about how to repackage this and reintroduce this to the fans.
Actually, also we expanded because we were limited in time. In the CBS broadcast, we had a few packages. We had history of Madison Square Garden. We had fans. We had a history of guest stars that performed on the show, and we really had to squeeze them down for the CBS broadcast. On the full length, they're much longer. History of the Garden is a longer piece. We should, everything is longer. So people will be seeing that for the first time as well, expanded versions, and it's different. It really flows nice. It's completely different than the CBS broadcast.
To that point, we're talking now about 3 cuts of the film. Obviously, you mentioned the CBS broadcast was a super quick turnaround. So it started there, and then you moved on to cutting the full show together.
Right.
And then the PBS broadcast came from the full show.
Yeah, we went back and forth. Steve and I did a few rounds, and again, they had limited time as well. So
Mhm.
you're playing
Yeah.
Tetris a little bit, but we wanted to give fans something different and something compelling and something new. Something it's a pledge show, so they're
Right.
looking to fundraise.
From the original CBS, when you moved on to do the full show, was it taking what you like the edits you had done for CBS and then expanded it, or were those songs in the original broadcast re-edited as well?
The edits from the CBS special are the same edits that you'll see in the extended, with the caveat that there's heads and tails. You'll see a little bit more at the beginning, a little bit more at the end.
Right. We did no music edits on the CBS version. We had to squeeze, yes, we had to cut out audience. It breathes better in the full length. You get more of a sense of the audience and their joy, and
Mhm.
it really works nice.
Yeah, going back to the set list for a second, I was curious about this. The big tree for me, at least, was having Half a Mile Away in there. And, we know Billy will do usually a deep cut once every show at MSG, but I don't think that one had come up in a long time. What were the discussions like about what deep cuts or what songs that aren't played every time, which one of those were going to go in? You kind of alluded to it before, but I was curious, like how you guys landed on those.
The conversation was, look, we brought over the 100 shows, we brought, deep cuts in throughout, and we looked at all of the deep cuts that we performed. We sort of had a conversation like we always do. Which is the one that worked the best, that is the most fun to play, and feels special. And Half a Mile Away was one of the ones that just raised to the top. It was Half a Mile Away or Room of Our Own, or a couple of ones that were played more than Modern Woman a couple of times. So there were a few of them, but Half a Mile Away was always got a great crowd reaction, and it was kind of a unique thing. So that was why that one bubbled to the surface. It was a very short conversation. It was like, sat in the dressing room with the band, say, which one of these deep cuts you think we should put in? And like, I think everybody said Half a Mile Away right away. So,
Yeah.
Brian was a big fan of that. And Billy doesn't really, Billy didn't like the song until, I think Mike Del Judas did a poll on his website of deep tracks, and Half a Mile Away kept coming up as number 1 or number 2. So we knew it was a fan favorite. So that's how that one ended up there.
Stepping away from the show real quick, Barry, I was curious. We were looking at your site and, just looking at the breadth of artists you've worked with. Is there a difference between how you approach something, if it's a pop artist, a metal artist, a hard rock artist, something like that? Or from your end, is it just every show is individual, that sort of thing?
Every show is individual. I mean, I don't like doing anything that is cookie cutter and, the old, what I call broadcast, or, it used to be, okay, you place cameras, over here, over there, but every artist is different. And, you want to adjust it to the artist to best present them. So I try not to do any cookie cutter productions. Billy was unique in that, again, rotating camera platform, and, he does what he wants. One of the first questions I asked Steve, even, Steve and I go back over 20 years, and I've seen Billy a million times, but when it got down to the production aspect and I'm thinking about it, I'm like, who controls the rotation of his piano? And Steve goes, Billy does, and he will never listen to you. If you ask him to do something or not to do something, he'll do the complete opposite. So we had to come up with a creative way to be able to get him, because you never know. You want to see him sing. You want a camera looking at the front of him. We never knew which way he'd be facing. So that was, like other shows, answer to your question, it's you can't do cookie cutter productions. Every artist is different. The cadence of every show is different. and what they perform. Are they guitar heavy? Are they dance heavy? Are they,
Hmm.
vocal heavy? And we also wanted to film this very cinematically. Steve always says, I want this filmed like if it was 1965 and the camera guy had a 100-pound camera on his shoulder, that you couldn't move much. And that's the beauty of cinematic shoots. It's yes, you use cinematic cameras, but just because you use the cinema camera and cinema lenses doesn't make something cinematic. It's movement,
Sure.
it's filming things that's right for the artist, right for the venue. It has to all come together creatively.
Barry and I sort of had a run up at this with this exact team. We did the John Mellencamp film, Words and Music. I think was that the name of the film? I forget the name.
No, it was the name
That
of
was the
that
album.
tour.
So the point is that it was Paul Dugdale, who I had met. I had done a Lenny Kravitz film with him, which is when I had first met him in Europe. And this is, many, many years ago. So when the Mellencamp project came up, I said to Barry, let's see if we can get Paul. Paul came in and did this. And, there's some similarities in style and in lighting, obviously, same director, same lighting guy, same producer. But it was a proof of concept that I knew from the beginning that when we were going to do Billy, that I wanted it to be Barry and I wanted it to be Paul. So we had a couple of bites at the apple. So, and that one still stands up. I mean, I looked at it the other day. I mean, John ended up doing a voiceover throughout because he hates live concerts. So he kind of stomped on a lot of the drama of it. But that in its release, you can turn off his dialogue. It's sort of like
Oh,
a
cool.
director's
Yeah,
cut
yeah.
and actually watch
Right.
the film.
That was a great film. And I worked with Paul previously as well. So when Steve and I were talking Mellencamp, he mentioned Paul, and I was like, absolutely. And Paul was gracious enough. He was excited. He's a Billy fan as well, and he came across the pond to check out the shows a couple of times, and
Hmm.
it just was magical. Magical team.
Obviously, Steve, you've been at every show. Barry, you've seen him a bunch of times. The director came out, and I remember, Steve, you mentioned that you guys set up the whole rig at Bickey's Black Box in Lidditz, Pennsylvania, to test everything out. Even with all that preparation, was there anything different on the night of the performance that was either like a happy accident or something like a challenge that you had to work around in the moment that you couldn't prepare for?
It's funny. You can do all the prep in the world, and you can be rehearsed, and you can have your camera moves rehearsed, and you can have all your plan. There's something that happens when the house light goes out where it's almost like an Etch-a-Sketch, where like it's a blank slate and you don't fucking know anything. And that first couple of songs, like you're looking at monitors and you're seeing how everything's reacting in real time and everybody's adrenaline is going and you're seeing the speed of which the cameras are moving and the director settling in. So, like it was all a surprise. Like we sort of knew what our box paints were, but the magic didn't really land on us until we had enough time to like, all right, we had a couple songs under our belt. Up, the audience is good. Up, the band's a little nervous. Up, Billy's a little nervous. Where he's, you're kind of sensing and you're being in the moment. There's this really magical thing that happens when you're doing these things because I've always said, the live experience is ephemeral. Like you leave and it's over, and whatever record of it that you see is only part of the whole story. And it was the same thing that night. I think about halfway through, I looked over to Mark Lafano, who, my co-designer in all of this, and we kind of looked at each other and went, "Is it good? Are we okay?" And you all look at each other because everybody doubts. We're like, I don't know. It feels right, but you never really know. That is where we get to experience the same kind of vibe and feeling that the musicians do, because you can be rehearsed till, from today until tomorrow. But once the lights go out, the other thing that's an interesting fact is everything slows down when you start it. Like you have much more time to make decisions in real time. Because when you're prepping, you're always thinking 1 step ahead, 2 steps ahead, 3 steps ahead. But when it's happening, you have to be in the moment. So, I think, it's the old Malcolm Gladwell 10,000 hours thing. Like if you've got 10,000 hours under your belt, you've got muscle memory and you know how to react the best you can. But I don't think any of us knew what we were going to get. We kind of knew, but you never know. Like,
Yeah, you're nervous. You're there a very long day. You have one chance to get it right. It's a lot of nerves going in. You're worried about cameras dying and you're worrying about audio cutting out. It's one chance to get it right. Everybody, talks about The Last Waltz as being the, greatest concert film ever. Most of it was reshot in a studio a couple of days later, after the show. We had one chance to get it right. He wasn't playing 2 nights. We weren't going to film the 100th and 101st show. We had to film, show 100. That was it. That was the show, and it was being broadcast 12 days after we filmed it, and that, a lot goes into it. Using one of Steve's quotes, the inside baseball. And it's kind of funny. 2 things happen during the show. Right before Innocent Man, he usually does this little Rolling Stones "Start Me Up" gag. And then during You May Be Right, they go into Rock and Roll by Led Zeppelin. When you release a show, you have to get publishing sync rights. And the Rolling Stones and Led Zeppelin are notoriously restrictive about the use of their music. And we were told that Led Zeppelin never licenses their music, period. That's it. You can ask, but it's not going to happen. So that morning, we didn't get clearance. We were waiting. Steve had to go to the bands to say, look, I don't think we could do it's rock and roll segue, and You May Be Right. The band was upset. They're kind of resigned to it. They would just play the song throughout. And 2 hours before the show, Jimmy Page granted approval for sync rights. So we're able to, do that. So that was a little nervy. And Mick Jagger also gave us permission to use Start Me Up, which was both because, they don't allow that to anybody, but it's Billy. And I guess everybody loves him. Everybody has affection for him. But those were 2 unknowns going in.
The thing about that with Bill is that, you never ask him to get in the room and do your work for you. But, when it comes down to like him being the only one to do it, it was like, hey, Bill, can we tell Jimmy it's a personal request from you? And he's like, fuck yeah, I'm a that one day. That's Billy saying, Billy does that the same way when I want to get a reservation in a restaurant and I go, and he goes, well, use my name. I don't care. So, he's pretty generous with that power, especially when it comes to music, because he's such a huge music fan and they all know it. But the Jimmy Page one was like running down the hall. It was almost like the McCartney moment. Hey, McCartney's coming. Hey, we Led Zeppelin said okay.
Over the past few years, we got the extended versions of reimagined almost of Live from Long Island in Yankee Stadium. This time around, the concert shot. 12 days later, it airs. And about just a year later, we get the full Blu-ray. Was the experience of putting this together in that compressed form, obviously with the 12 days, of course, but even just a year out versus the amount of time that Live from Long Island in Yankee Stadium had to germinate with fans and gain their status, was it a different experience turning around and releasing the full version of this so quickly?
We knew we were capturing history in a world where there's only so many opportunities you're going to get to see Billy and that band live. We also have the memory of not adequately covering previous shows. Yankee Stadium was a 26-song set list. We only shot 11, 12 songs. We didn't shoot the whole show. And in fact, when we went to recut it, John Small was like, I think I shot the whole show. And then when we went in and retransferred all the film, it was like, no. In fact, in Yankee Stadium, Uptown Girl is kind of cobbled together. Like we only have part of Uptown Girl. We had to Frankenstein that particular song a little bit because we didn't have a full coverage with all the cameras. So I knew that I didn't want to make that mistake this time. And Barry and I knew that we got the cameras here, we've got everybody here, we've got the team here. Our eye was always on the prize of getting all of it.
Yeah. That was actually standard practice in the old broadcast days of live broadcasts where, when they went to commercial, everybody put down their cameras. They stopped directing. And then, you go
Right.
back into the archives. I experienced it a few times on old Farm Aid shows. I was involved with the archive. We went back to look at the footage, and all of a sudden everybody just put their camera down. and when they went to commercial, it's so
Yeah.
frustrating. So we wanted to capture every minute of this show, and everything was the same loving care. And also, it should be noted that unlike many shows, there's something many people do what's called the line cut. You're calling cameras live, and that's what people use that's released. We didn't do what's called the line cut. No cameras were called, we didn't record and edit live. We went back and meticulously edited every song from scratch, which was just a huge project to get it done in 8 days. Then with coloring and probably with editors and assistant editors, we probably had a team of about 20 people working on this. And then again, we returned, and I don't know if it was 3 months, 4 months, 6 months later to do the rest of the songs in that same loving fashion.
When a director is concentrated on doing a line cut, he's directing his cameras to get him in and out of certain places to get coverage so that he can take that particular shot at a particular time that's generally listed in a shot list where an assistant director is saying, you have 4 seconds before the guitar solo and 12 seconds before the drum fill and that kind of stuff. So what it does directorially is it forces you to make the cameras hit their marks at particular times. What Paul Dugdale said was, I don't want to do this. I want each cameraman to look at their shots as continuous shots. I don't want positions. I want to go from one place to another with intention. It ends up putting you in a situation where the camera is your eye. So if you're looking at a guitar solo, your head is going to pan over to the drums and back to the vocal when the vocal starts singing. So the camera acts as your eye. When you're having to do a line cut, you are interrupting that entire shot. So Paul was adamant about it. But the producers, the people who are paying for it, want to walk away with something. So what we did was we had an assistant director who basically banged together an edit without knowing where the cameras were going to go, without knowing what he was going to cover, just to give a flavor of those shots. That particular line cut was something that we could then hand to Sony and say, proof of concept. Hey, we got it. We got a show, but pay no attention to it. So, Paul was like, I don't want anything to do with that.
Yeah, I don't even think we digitized it in the edit suite.
I think we just gave him the raw tape, and and then it got put in a burn bag.
You've both mentioned how you wanted it to be cinematic. On a technical level, what does that mean? Is that just the quality of camera? Is it also the lenses, along with the angles you're thinking of? Like, what did that mean in terms of the equipment and the strategies that you put together for this?
I think you want to use what's best for the circumstance. There are many types of cinematic cameras. There are many types of lenses. It's the environment that you're in and how we wanted to shoot it dictates what cameras you use, what lenses you want to use. And that changes for every show. You asked me before, I do a lot of different genres of music. I've produced a lot of different types of artists. In this instance, we chose Arri cameras. We chose certain cinematic lenses to capture the lighting properly and to capture where the cameras were. It's really a long discussions and a lot of charting and saying, okay, we're going to put a camera here. Our Brett Turnbull, our DP, did CAD drawings and showed us in advance what the camera would look like, what the angle would look like in advance. So, everything is just mated properly. And that's a lot of work in itself.
Lens selection is really important. when you talk about the cinema aspect of it, because when you're doing a multi-camera live shoot, most of your lenses need to be more general. In other words, you want focal lengths where you can get in close and when you can get wide.
Mhm.
So you end up sacrificing a certain amount of quality by not using what they call prime lenses, which means that it's a fixed aspect ratio, it's a fixed size, and generally prime lenses, the glass is a little bit better because the lens doesn't have to do multiple things. So when you're charting something like that, you have a DP who says, well, this shot is really what we want this shot to do. If we put a prime lens in this position, we are going to get the best quality of that shot, but we know that the camera operator has to frame it. That's where the math and the algebra or the geometry plays into something like that. So when you're talking cinema playback, the reason they look that good blown up on a big screen is because you're using the best glass for that particular shot, which A, it's more expensive. B, it means that you need more cameras. The other thing is that you got a guy who doesn't want to put camera operators up there. So now with robotics, you have to go in and you have the opportunity to have a lot more flexibility on the camera without an operator holding it on his shoulder. And that's a whole other set of like, well, that camera's got to be able to do this. What's the best for that application?
Steve, when you're speaking about lenses, what really struck me this time was how well defined the lighting was. Like you could just see, almost the borders on every beam. There were those shots where you could see like a prism of lights around the stage. And, I imagine that's the difference between like if you're listening to your band being like shot on a video camera versus, being in the studio and hearing it on the best mics. What's that like seeing, your lighting designs shot, with those prime lenses? Is it like more of what you envisioned? Do you see it in a way you've never seen before? Because it definitely has such a more enhanced effect.
There's a dance, lights and cameras. There's a dance in exposure, in focus, in color selection. The lenses are much more capable of capturing more. They can capture more dynamic. The shadows are clearer and cleaner. What I did was, assume, having had some experience doing television lighting, that there are certain tricks of the trade that you utilize to maximize the depth of field in the cameras and the intensity of the lights. If I was to give you an overall note, a lot of cases you dim down the intensity of the lights when you're shooting on camera so as to create more work for the lens. The lens has to kind of grab onto those to that light to be able to, to get the proper exposure. So it's a little bit of a constant dance, especially with moving lights and with dichroic filters, where certain things react to your eye a certain way, and they don't react as well on camera as they do to your eyes. It's a true collaboration between me and the director of photography, and Mark and me and the director of photography to, get the maximum approach. The other thing is you got a live show. So you don't want to lose the cues. You don't want to lose the energy of what the lighting brings to that. And in fact, I have a tendency to be a little bit more conservative, and Barry was on me on this. It's like, no, you got to do those cues. I get a nerd to it. It's like, yeah, they're lighting cues. I've seen them a million times. But
Right.
someone that observes them says, no. You got to do all of that dynamic stuff because that's part of the excitement that leads to the audience's experience. So it's a dance. We're very fortunate. I have, Fafano's got years and years of time, shooting on camera. I mean, he had just come off of shooting the whole Star Trek series in Canada, and that's some cutting edge shit that he was doing. We brought all of that knowledge and experience to bear. And once again, you never really know until you get there. Like the smoke changes, like there's smoke in the room. So you got smoke that comes in front of the camera that affects the exposure. So,
Sure.
there's a few things that can be controlled, but not completely controlled. And you got to be able to make those in-flight changes when you see something happening on a monitor.
Yeah, and in the old days, they used to light up rooms like game shows.
Yeah.
Very bright rooms. And with cinema, you want to dim down the lights more, but the dance is that you want to make it darker using these cinema cameras to really give it that cinematic look. But also,
Right.
there are 20,000 people in the room. So everything has to be well lit for them. What looks good on camera might look differently in the room. So that's really the dance that Steve has to live, that we all have to live in,
Mhm.
being able to make it really good for cinema, but also still look good in the room. And some of those cues are important. Like, to me, Miami 2017, which is what opens the show, it's that first lighting thing that you do, Steve. It just sets the tone for the rest of the night when the room just explodes in lights. It's you
Mm.
can't get rid of those cues. They're
Yep.
so important. And I
Mhm.
think the beauty of the show also is that, as Steve said, there were 3 actors in this show. Is that I really think we achieved making it the audience, the viewer at home, keeping their attachment to Billy, giving that intimacy of many of our shots, but also showing the grandeur of Madison Square Garden with some of the, with some of the wide shots, that really show the lighting and, hey, this is Madison Square Garden.
Mhm.
So I think we achieved a good segue between those two worlds.
At the end of the day, we got recognition from the most important people because we got an Emmy for the lighting, and that is voted on by fellow members in that category. So, it isn't the general public saying, "Oh, it was lit good." The awards we got were from our contemporaries, Mark and our contemporaries, people that we've worked with, people that we know, that all had dogs in the fight and said, "These guys did the best job this year." So that was gratification that I did look, I've been doing this for 5 decades. So to get that little notch in the belt was beyond incredible.
Generally, when I go in to shoot a show, it's because the artist wants it, their manager wants it, and I walk in and I'm the enemy to production. I'm the pain in the butt. They all have to work a little harder. I've never experienced a team that never said no. We came up with an idea. Hey, we had them move the front of, their monitor world and guitar world, so we could fit platforms on the side of the stage for moving cameras to make sure we capture Billy. It was just nobody ever said no, and that's Steve, and that's the whole Billy Joel team. Everybody wanted to make this great, and I've
Mhm.
never had a better experience as a producer because there was never a no. In Madison Square Garden, the same thing. They let us bring in a spider cam, which they never allow, which is, cables going across the ceiling with, a heavy camera flying over an audience, like what they do on the NFL. But the NFL, they just use a small HD camera. This is a big, heavy camera. They even approved this using a drone in going anywhere we
In the
wanted to go
building.
with in the
Yeah.
building. We ended up not, I felt that was a little too dangerous with spider cam cables going across, but Madison Square Garden allowed us to do whatever we wanted to do. I didn't get a single you can't do that the entire process, and that's why it's so good.
The reason we got all of that cooperation is because, it all comes from Billy. Billy is a collaborative, non-temperamental prima donna who makes no demands. He just wants everybody to show up and do the best they possibly can. And that vibe gets translated all the way through the organization. Madison Square Garden had, a walk in the park once a month. It was a huge revenue stream for them. It established the brand of Madison Square Garden along with a franchise with a musician. It was mutually beneficial for everybody. No one had an agenda. Like, everybody wanted to do the best do the best they could. There were conversations, obviously, but and there was money. You had to pay people, but even that was part of a negotiation that was not oppressive. We made fair deals and they made fair deals. There's this whole theory about how New York always has its hand out, and wants
Sure.
and is punitive. There was none of that. It's the high price spread, but it was not, it was not prohibitive for us to do our job. And Madison Square Garden got one of the most visually powerful advertisements for that room. I watch it today and I look at Bill he's 76 last week. You know, he was 74 when we did the show. I look at this guy at this point in his career where ain't too many people on the planet that can pull that off. I mean, his contemporary Bruce is doing it now, but that there aren't too many out there that have that command and also have that kind of quality, that still remains. His voice was great, and the band was great. This is one of those documents that is at the highest level, celebrating like history. So I think we've done good.
150 lifetime shows and in one venue is just will never be repeated again. Venues that size, it's an amazing accomplishment, and it's forever going to be available. Smithsonian, I say.
Yes.
What are some of your favorite moments from the final, both in terms of like the musical performances and also just sequences that you think just came out exceptionally well?
My two favorites are Big Man on Mulberry Street with Sting, without a doubt, and Every Little Thing She Does Is Magic with Sting. I think those two things are just so great and so neat. I think the performance of Innocent Man and the performance of Still Rock and Roll to me are the best there is. And I will tell you, I've heard Scenes from an Italian Restaurant thousands and thousands of times. And I put the damn thing on and I get teary-eyed and my heart rate goes up every freaking time I see it. So I've heard that song when it got written. So like, it's remarkable to me how it still resonates with me so strongly. And I also think the other two songs that I think are the most beautiful examples of those performances are New York State of Mind and Vienna. I think those two moments are as good as any of that stuff gets. So those are my four.
Yeah, I was going to say the same thing. New York State and Vienna, they were just cinematic masterpieces. In fact, if you look at pretty much all of the artwork that was done and promotional artwork, they come from those two songs. Just Billy with the lights in the background and the lit wristbands. I mean, those songs are just cinematic masterpieces. And then just the big moments, you go on the downbeats and lighting cues when you go to those wide shots that just show Madison Square Garden. I mean, it's the most famous arena in the world. And when you really see it in all its glory, the sound mix was brilliant. Brian Ruggles, who has been with Billy, is, a little longer than Steve, did a great job. We also did the mix out in Los Angeles. And same thing, we mixed the first 14 songs and then came back and did the other 11. He did a masterful job. The audio is fantastic.
Is there anything that, in hindsight, that would have been something interesting to try that you didn't?
I would have loved to have had The Stranger in this. I would have loved for them to perform that song. I would have loved to have Stiletto. I would have loved to have had Until the Night. I think those are the three things that I miss a lot anyway, but I think those three songs as part of the legacy, maybe not Stiletto so much, but certainly Until the Night and The Stranger, I think were two songs that I would have loved to have been performed.
As a producer, there's a financial aspect of this. You're given a certain amount of money, and I'm always worried about being, staying there and not going over budget. So, my regrets are like, damn, I was under budget. I could have got another camera in there, or I could have got a different toy. Those are my regrets.
Sure.
And there's some great little bits, in the long form. The end credit roll with the few people in the crew making their comments about the experience that wasn't in the broadcast are really great. There's there's some good personality. You get to meet, part of this team that's been with him for, so many decades. So
Yeah.
you get a little flavor of the family and how important the garden was to all of us.
Barry, Steve, thanks so much, fellas, for joining us. We always appreciate y'all taking the time, and it's always great when we can get the folks involved, willingness to take us behind the curtain and show us some of the nuts and bolts with how some of these things come together. So thanks again for allowing us to do that with you.
I also personally want to thank Steve and Barry for their patience. If my video looked a little different and if I looked like I was a hostage at the beginning of that, is because I have 3 computers. None of them were working. And so while everybody was sitting, chatting politely at the assigned time to get in there, I'm running through all these computers and then just gave up and did it holding my phone up to me. So I'm all wall-eyed looking and freaked out. But they were great. They just hung around because I was going to be bummed. I thought Michael was going to have to do it on his own without me. But they stuck around. They waited for me. We made it work. And it was another great conversation.
Now we turn it back to you folks. Let us know what you think. Anything that surprised you about the production of this film and concert movie? Was there anything that caught your eye? Anything you loved particularly about it? Let us know. And also anything you learned today from Steve and Barry that you didn't know. Reach out to us, glasshousespodcast@gmail.com. We're all over the socials, Facebook and Instagram. And I don't know, we've been debating TikTok, but
Yeah. If I can wrap my head around short form video, we'll get on there, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We'll get there about a year and a half after it's in. All right.
Yeah. After like whatever else is like, they're like, no, you got to go back to Snapchat again, dorks.
Find us on MySpace and Friendster.
Joe, we should just do MySpace just out of spite, out of pure freaking spite.
That's right.
Yeah, exactly. Anyway, find us there or on our Discord. It's our little Reddit/AOL chat room style. Well, most of you know Discord by now. You can find a link to it in the show notes, and we'll see you there or in the email. Oh, and if you like this episode or other episodes, please remember to give us a 5-star rating and or positive review on the podcast platform of your choice. Every 5-star rating and or positive review tells the almighty algorithms that we are a podcast of merit and they should serve us up to other people. And while you're at it, I know I'm behind on getting stuff up on YouTube, but find us there anyway. And, smash the buttons, like and subscribe, do all the things. And we will see you next time.
We'll see you guys soon. Appreciate it.